We live in a time of global transformation. The Energy Futures podcast explores how we can accelerate the expansion of clean energy technologies and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. From heating and cooling our homes to moving around our planet and beyond, we bring together researchers, scientists, business leaders, and communicators to exchange knowledge and try to answer one important question. How can we create a sustainable energy future for all? This podcast is produced by Energy Futures Lab of Imperial College London.
How can complex industries with the heaviest carbon footprints transition to net zero? I am Dr. Gbemi Oluleye, a lecturer at Imperial College London and lead of the Green Industrial Interventions Lab that explores the economic complexities of industrial decarbonisation. My guest is Hearne, CEO and co-founder of CarbonChain and a leading expert in the transition of carbon-intensive industries to a net zero economy. Adam plays a pivotal role in providing automated asset-level carbon accounting for some of the world's largest and most impact-driven commodity companies, traders, manufacturers, financiers, and freight firms. We'll delve into the technical and non-technical challenges faced in industrial decarbonisation, the role of innovative solutions, and how advanced carbon management and software solutions are essential for achieving sustainable outcomes in energy-intensive sectors. Good morning, Adam. Thanks for joining me in this conversation on industrial decarbonisation. What does industrial decarbonisation mean to you?
Good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Industrial decarbonisation means to myself and as CEO of CarbonChain, we're tracking most of the world's emissions on our platform. It means decarbonising at scale. So knowing that the epicenter of emissions is within heavy industry, industrial decarbonisation means helping those sectors get onto a decarbonisation pathway and sustainably run that over a long period of time.
And can you share your experience in helping these energy-intensive sectors and getting on that pathway? Is it an easy journey for all subsectors within this broad category?
Yeah, and I should reiterate the goal of net zero by 2050 or sooner in that pathway. So we specialize in oil and gas and metals and materials and manufacturing. So that's where a majority of the world's emissions are. And a lot of our customers are trying to figure out a realistic decarbonisation pathway to net zero. So we help them understand the entire landscape of suppliers. Different metals can vary in carbon intensity by 20x. And so the market doesn't have good visibility on lower carbon suppliers at the moment. So we help those heavy industries identify lower carbon inputs and also lower carbon sources of electricity, because if we can decarbonize grids, we can also inadvertently decarbonize the industries that are connected to those grids.
That's correct. Just thinking about more broadly, what would you call a realistic decarbonization pathway for a particular industrial player?
There are some low-hanging fruit, sectors, although it is overall quite hard. But if I think of the aluminium sector, or if we're going out to American listeners, the aluminum sector, they're 90% driven by electricity consumption for their cost and therefore carbon pretty much. So if you can decarbonize their electricity source, you can almost have close to zero carbon aluminium. For steel, it's heavily dependent on electric arc furnaces. So the EU recently funded a couple of $1 billion worth of electric arc furnace upgrades, and they were able to reduce the emissions of that steel produced by 80% compared to the global benchmark. But then when it comes to energy, you have to look at some other renewable sources. And so is there a pathway for oil and gas? It's very difficult to bring that in. But if you can look at the carbon intensity per gigajoule produced and then start to decarbonize against that, the business case for renewables becomes really powerful. So thinking of renewable energy being like solar being cheaper than nuclear now per gigajoule is an incredible inflection point for industry. So that's how all those industries I've mentioned add up to about 82% of emissions each year. So that's a nice 80-20 approach to figuring out a pathway to decarbonize.
That's very correct. So you've mentioned energy efficiency, electrification of industry, a bit of fuel switching. Is there a unicorn technology to support industrial decarbonization? Like, can you put a bet on any technology?
I mean, there's some incredible deep tech out there. I'd have to take my hat off to some of those technologists and scientists working on radical new materials, fusion, nuclear fusion. But I do think the fundamentals of solar plus battery are an incredible value proposition. So you've got low complexity in the infrastructure itself. You've got an easier planning cycle because it's just installing an industrial battery plant versus a nuclear reactor. And you've also got predictable prerequisites and easier skill sets. And so I think that's something that should be leveraged a lot more. And it's mainly held up by bureaucracy. And so community solar is a great example of where you've had a small neighborhood band together and install that type of facility. And in 7 to 10 years, they're at break even and going beyond. And if we could just scale that up more, I think that would be the biggest breakthrough. So it's actually that very old problem of organization, community organization. We're just at a global community now, and we need to take what can be done at that social, local level and try to think a bit more globally.
And how do we bring that community engagement or cooperation to industry, so to energy intensive sectors, for instance? What would it look like?
Yeah, with every good community initiative, I think there's often that community hero, the person who organizes everybody and gets things moving. And I think at a global level, that community hero is unfortunately or fortunately government catalysts. And so some government subsidy to kick things off financially. We've seen the power of financial incentives in the past, and then also just really smart policy to tell these developers or industrial investors wanting to scale up that they can get a clearer path to approvals and permits if they are betting on renewable energy. I think that would create incredible momentum for the industry.
I mean, what do you think about carbon capture and storage, carbon dioxide removal? So I agree that betting on renewable energy in the short to medium term is the low-hanging fruit. But what about, sectors that produce CO2 as a product, for instance, where electrification could be a challenge? What would be your advice to those sectors?
Yeah, we have a many pronged approach. I think it takes a lot of tools on the decarbonisation tool belt to tackle this. And you make a good point. There are some sectors that the industrial process itself has a reaction and they need to sequester carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And I think that's where there could be some good breakthroughs. At the moment, I think for every coal power station, and if you're installing scrubbers, you basically need a fifth power station to power the scrubbers of all the other power stations. So it's like you're only getting 75% of the power you want if you're trying to do it with sequestration at the plant level. And so we've got to move beyond that to make it scalable. And I think that's where you can start to look at other smarter grids to figure out where you load balance to coal in those cases, or just take some big bets on trying to install that infrastructure earlier on with government subsidies.
Yes. I mean, we've moved from technology to government subsidies to industrial cooperation, and I want us to play a little game on what you think is the biggest challenge.
Okay.
So you're going to write what you think is the biggest challenge, and I'm going to do the same, and then we'll see if we agree. and then we discuss it. So don't look at what I'm writing.
Yeah.
Look at yours as well. So let's see.
It's the biggest challenge.
Biggest challenge to industrial decarbonisation. What's that thing that needs to be addressed to move the needle?
Okay. All right, let's go. I've got 2 needle movers, if that's okay. I don't mean to break the rules, but I do think we need a bit more.
It's okay. So let's see what you have.
Okay.
So smart policy carbon price. I mean, we agree. I put unstable policies. So carbon price is a type of policy. It's a market-based measure. So we agree, viewers. The biggest challenge to move the needle is unstable policies, lack of smart policies. Let's delve into it a little bit more. How crucial is having smart policies? How essential is having smart policies to move the needle on industrial decarbonisation? And this would be the role of governments, I think, and also the private sector working together to come up with robust, stable policies. So how important is this?
Yeah, I think with ever-changing governments, and coming from Australia, I can talk to how dynamic the government can be and changes of leadership, but policy can endure for a very long time if it's done in a smart way or if it's made stable. And if you think of the time horizons that investment has to take place, if you really want to decarbonize industry, you have to kind of work at this awkward time horizon of about 10 years. And it's not like you're within incentive plans at private companies that are 5 years out, it's 10 years. And it's really hard to put a model together with cash flows that gives any assurances to an investor committee at a 10-year horizon, because the world can change so quickly. But at the same time, if you try to go too far, you're kind of just making a model into perpetuity. And so having smart, stable policies that can handle that 10-year horizon, this sort of middle distance, I think would be incredibly de-risking for a lot of these players who have to take on a lot of other risks already. So there's already development risk in itself, construction risk, engineering risk, labor force risk, and then financial risk. And so if you can have a smart policy, I think you can move from good government infrastructure to great government infrastructure. And there are some good examples in the past where private-public partnerships, so you get a private company implementing, but you just are backed by the public mandate. I think that's a sweet spot for getting more stable policy.
And what will form a good policy mix? So in my opinion, I think we need to have some regulations and mandates. We need to have market-based policy like a carbon price, an emission trading scheme, some grants, some incentives. And we need a lot of information and awareness as well, building on these 3 pillars, and some form of private finance as well, so blended revenue mechanisms. What do you agree with me? Do you see something as more important in this group of policies?
Yeah, I think you've mentioned some really good levers, and to me, there needs to be a bit of a revolution in mindset and the way policy has been thought of before. And so I think governments sometimes are a bit too simplistic in that they'll give a grant, but it's not linked to really good milestones, like tangible milestones. So instead of grants for broad outcomes, like a grant for breaking ground on a site that is about to develop some type of infrastructure, and knowing that the risk that is taken out of the entire investment because you've been able to get equipment in on site and start construction, that is a very good gift to the project pipeline, knowing that the rest of the world is very familiar with what it's like to work on something that's already approved. But if we're not getting enough project recognition through to that stage, then that's quite tricky. And then I think the carbon price we mentioned as a element of policy, it's a bit of a blunt instrument in some ways, but it's also, if it's done in the right way, I think a big public, a way to get public consensus is thinking of a fair transition or a just transition. So with my background, I spent 12 years with a company called Rio Tinto, looking at how the world's materials and metals are produced for modern life. And you had to look at your social license to operate there and thinking of what is a fair project to kick off. How do you ensure that all stakeholders are getting, I guess, good exposure to the upside of that project? And I think carbon pricing is no different. It makes no sense to just have a carbon tax at a single point of trading and not being able to distribute that across the value chain, or punishing some sectors over other sectors when it can be handled a bit more smartly. And so I think as technology improves, we can figure out better ways to administer these policies that aren't so traditional.
We'll come to the technology challenges in a bit, but let's talk more on carbon price or price and mechanisms and within the UK landscape. So thinking of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, for instance, is that really going to move the needle? Is that a good demand pool mechanisms for industries around the world to invest in decarbonization, or would they just pay
It's quite a poignant question, because as we sit here today, the EU is imposing fines in 2026. The UK is on track to do it in 2027, and under the conditions of Brexit, the UK needs to follow the EU system, and so we've effectively still got a very large block of markets in the world that are now having a carbon border, and that didn't exist before. Now there's a carbon border, and what we've noticed is, from our experience, is the power of that block is incredible. So we have a lot of US customers who are driven by the fact that they need to export to the EU, and they will be now measuring their carbon emissions simply to serve the requirements of that carbon border around Europe. So that's, although there are some countries that very much protest against that, India being an example, China somewhat, we are seeing a ripple effect around the world. And also just a reminder of the connectivity of supply chains around the world. Yes. Even if a few countries don't want to buy into it, there are enough countries that our day-to-day manufactured goods pass through that you have to at one point be exposed to this European carbon border, and therefore we're seeing the global phenomenon take off.
So if we look at the technology typologies to support industrial decarbonization, whether electrification using renewables, so it could be electrification of heat or electrification of processes, it could be carbon capture, utilization and storage, it could be synthetic fuels, it could be energy efficiency, for instance. Should policies be technology agnostic? Given that depending on the technologies on these decarbonization pathways, the costs will be different, right? The project costs will be different. How do you, design policies? I mean, it's a basic question of, should it be technology agnostic, or should these policies have some technology specificity or sector specificity?
Sector specificity goes a long way. We've seen the power of having a government arm that is very verticalized, knowing how to deal with issues from primary production to secondary manufacturing, and the experts that can help in those spaces. So I think there is a case to be made for governments being vertically focused. When it comes to technology, it's quite hard to be agnostic, I think, because the risk profile is so extremely different from one technology to the other. But I think if the government was designing around just old-fashioned KPIs, to steal a quote from Professor Peter Drucker, what gets measured gets managed. I think if government policies were anchored to carbon intensity per gigajoule, and they needed to perform to certain thresholds or benchmarks, then I think we would start to see proper risk management of government policy implementation, and then the projects that would follow. And I think there you'd naturally drive a lot of innovation, because you get to see projects delivered, as opposed to a lot of nuclear projects in the world that are being held up everywhere except for China at the moment.
Is there anything that industry, so the industrial sector, so an example could be energy intensive sector, is anything they can do to move the needle in spite of the gaps in existing policies, right? So we would like an ideal, stable, smart policy environment, but we don't have that yet. So what can industry do in spite of this challenge to move the needle on decarbonization in a cost-effective way?
For industry, I think information is power. And I think if they can share information about the carbon intensity of their products, that is an incredible moment for a buyer or day-to-day consumers like you and I to start to think of lower carbon options, to start to vote for a lower carbon option, to buy lower carbon products. I see every purchase as we're going about our Christmas shopping plans this year. When you're voting, you can it's like you're weaponizing your wallet. So your spend is a vote. And if some of these private sectors were able to just publish carbon intensity down to product level ubiquitously around the world, in the same way you see calorie information on a product label, as you look at those Christmas calories, which don't count in December. The calories don't count. But for climate, it always counts, unfortunately. Yeah. And so if we could start to get nutrition label transparency on the world, on products that the world consumes, I think that social movement could be an incredibly powerful force, just like the community example we gave at the start, how when people are well organized, they can put in infrastructure. And when people are well organized in what they buy, I think they can change demand in a market. And I think markets are incredibly powerful at discovering price. But if we could just include the externality of carbon intensity on the purchases, I think markets could be used again to actually drive markets to lower carbon supply. And then that's a way we could switch the intersection of supply and demand to a lower carbon optimal equilibrium.
That's amazing. I mean, we've spoken about the challenge with unstable policies. We've spoken about how to make the policy environment better. And you just gave a fantastic recommendation to industrial players on what they can do in spite of lack of smart policy. So we're going to play another game.
Great. Let's get into it.
So that's your
You get a fresh sheet.
You get a fresh sheet. And we're going to focus on opportunities. Let's try and go to a positive note. What do you think is the biggest opportunity industrial decarbonisation can unlock? All right. So if we get there, we get to a point where industry is net zero, what's the biggest opportunity that can unlock? So thinking forward.
The biggest opportunity that industrial decarbonisation. All right, let's go for it. I am done.
Okay, let's see. What do you have?
Go first?
Yeah, I will go first. I wrote new jobs from a clean industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Stable economy.
I wrote lower cost products and energy bills.
So that's linked to a stable economy. So we agree. I wrote new jobs. I think we need new jobs.
Yeah.
So that's good. So let's discuss your biggest opportunity, especially lower cost products and energy bills. So lower cost products, how is that possible given that industrial decarbonization comes with a heavy financial bill?
Yeah, I think lower cost energy cascades all the way through the supply chain from these energy intensive oxidization processes to make new metals, to the transport that is taking those goods from one stage of production to the next, to the final Amazon delivery van that drops your goods off being electrified. And when you can actually create a more renewable energy source, because the technology is more recent, you're actually creating a more stable energy supply, and so you're improving cash flows for a lot of companies. There's been some economic analysis that shows modern renewable energy supplies is more profitable, or infrastructure run by renewable energy is more profitable than run by traditional energy sources. So lower cost products, and then I think just getting to consumers day to day, they'll get to experience that. And I agree on the new jobs. The fastest growing job sectors in the US right now are solar panel installers and wind turbine maintainers. They're the top two. So you can create an employment revolution for an accessible skill class, and you can also, again, give more to families around lower cost energy. And so the reward of having a workforce that's focused on decarbonisation is not only they're getting income, but they're making the cost of energy around them cheaper. And so they're actually lowering the cost of civic life incredibly.
Amazing. I mean, I know we're focused on energy-intensive sectors, but is there any learning from energy-intensive sectors that are on their decarbonization pathway that other sectors that are less energy-intensive can apply? Is there any specific? Because decarbonization is said to be cheaper in less energy-intensive sectors, maybe less complex as well. But can you give any advice to the less energy-intensive sectors? We're looking at food and drinks, for instance, cardboard papers.
Yeah, the trend that we've seen is marketing and awareness is a great opportunity. And most of our customers are heavy industry. So if you think of the sectors you really need to decarbonize, to the point where it's almost against their business interests to decarbonize, they're our customers, and we help them with this very good granular view of their carbon information. And they need many different positive forces behind this business case to get it off the ground. And one thing that other sectors could take away from these energy intensive sectors or high carbon sectors is just the ability to market what is a greener choice or a lower carbon choice, to pick a safer term, and making it transparent. And I think food and beverage gave a good example of sustainable coffee or sustainable cocoa, giving different nutrition information. And I think if there's more sustainable information provided in other products, that really resonates with the public, and people want to do more than just count calories now. They want to know that they're buying things that will make a difference. And if you are buying luxury goods, for example, the signal you can send up the supply chain just ripples incredibly. And we see a lot of business cases at the primary sector driven by end user signals. And I used to work in diamonds for a period of time with Rio Tinto, and when a diamond buyer says they want a diamond sourced from a particular area, the market listens. And I think that was the power of seeing how the premium end of the market can also drive change. And I would encourage other sectors to use their marketing muscles to figure out how they can make sure that their customers love them even more.
Amazing. So one end of the spectrum is marketing muscles, the other end of the spectrum is policies, another end of the spectrum is some collaboration, and of course another end of the spectrum is the finance sector, really in coming together to move the needle or drive industrial decarbonization. But that being said, I would like us to discuss the international landscape on industrial decarbonization and compare it to the UK landscape. Which of these landscapes is more exciting for you to work on? What can the UK learn from what's happening around the world? Or are we really leading on industrial decarbonization?
The UK is leading on a couple of things. The UK is leading on ambition, putting big targets out there at local government level and also at national level. The UK isn't leading on incentives, financial incentives for industry to move. If you look at the US, that has the Inflation Reduction Act, 370 billion directly earmarked for projects that will help with different, inflationary measures in the US, but it's targeted towards decarbonisation. That financial catalyst, to steal a quote from a famous musician, you can't start a fire without a spark, and you need a financial spark to get some industries moving. Otherwise, you could be dancing in the dark. Bruce Springsteen, great musician. But I do think you need that financial catalyst to get things moving, and giving the UK landscape the economic case to start would be incredible. Reducing a lot of the permitting that's needed. You just look at the track record of projects over here. The UK is just fraught with legacy policies that they have to navigate. And what I think they can take from the rest of the world is just thinking about sourcing of materials. And so you can actually, like China controversially, although they haven't lent into the Paris Agreement as much as we'd like, they're producing 90% of the world's solar panels, almost 95% of wind turbine components and a majority of the world's batteries. And if they stopped exporting that, they could decarbonize domestically in an incredibly rapid pace. And I think we need to look at that in the UK and think of how can we support other industrial efforts, whether it be manufacturing or just industrial storage, industrial scale battery storage, trying to avoid the perils of what happened to Northvolt, where you've kind of had $15 billion of investment just go into bankruptcy recently. There's a lot to learn from that, and we can actually help in the UK and be a little bit more ambitious, not just with putting statements into the press, but actually putting money into industry and helping them get started.
Amazing. So what about the innovation landscape? So this is the really R&D stage of a deep technology for decarbonization. How is the UK doing compared to different parts of the world? So we've talked about the market, for this technology. So this is where the incentives come into play. But in the early stages of innovation, for deep tech, for deep decarbonization of industry, so both software and hardware, how are we doing, compared to the rest of the world?
Software-wise, I can speak a little bit more to than hardware deep tech. I think the UK's strength has been funding very early stage companies for software, whether it be carbon tracking like us or looking at smart grids. The UK has an incredible opportunity, given its size. If you can increase the IQ of the grid, you can actually help with distribution problems that are quite costly at the moment, and getting the right storage and nodes on the network to help load balance would be an incredible step forward. So I think that's quite a good smart play. In terms of deeper tech, it's harder to comment on. I don't know what the UK's appetite has been for nuclear, and it's quite a controversial topic in some parts of Europe. But I do think that the UK is looking into a lot of industrial decarbonisation, specifically around steel, a few pioneering efforts there, and other material production methods. I think there's still a traditional home of research around novel applications of new materials, and so watch this space. I believe there's some podcasts that might be coming up in future around innovative materials.
Amazing. So let's delve into carbon accounting, and being able to track emissions and measure emissions. Would you consider that as the underdog when it comes to innovations? Because it's like a soft innovation, isn't it? Because not all industrial players measure their carbon or track their carbon emissions. And there is no, to the best of my knowledge, no international standard or regulation that forces them to do so. I may be wrong, but is it an underdog in the space of?
I think it's fair to say, it could be considered an underdog. I mean, carbon accounting has been around for 20 plus years, yet the world has somehow been increasing its carbon, its absolute emissions year after year. And so if the world on average said that they're going to halve emissions by 2030, here we are at 50 gigatons a year now, and we're wanting to get to 25 gigatons in the next 5 years. We're pretty much 2025, it's just around the corner. So somehow we've got to get rid of 5 gigatons a year from the system in perpetuity each year. So 5 gigatons a year, like 1 gigaton every couple of months, that's going to take some radical industry transformation. And there is a common currency and tracking mechanism you need to just try to distribute that pain as efficiently as possible. And to us, carbon tracking is about that. It's about defining what is a fair transition for markets to change. And if you can get really good granularity, then you can actually come up with smarter policy. And so although I was quick to criticize policy at the start of the podcast, I do think they've been disadvantaged due to a lack of resolution into what's actually possible. What are the levers that policy can play on? And it's not just about carbon tax or no carbon tax. It can be about looking at certain points for incentives to come into play, or it can be targeting certain industries with a carbon price and helping them create a business case for that.
Yeah, so data-driven policy, really. But coming back to like carbon tracking, if you had a magic wand and you were going to design like a regulation or a standard to make every industrial player engage in carbon tracking or carbon measurement, what would it be?
So the point you mentioned around a global standard before is a good one. There isn't anything mandated that covers all scopes of emissions. So scope 1 emissions being your direct emissions, and scope 2 and 3 being indirect emissions that are in your value stream or the electricity you buy. So knowing that there actually are standards, but it's just that not everyone is following them. So if I had a magic wand, we would just get a lot of these companies to acknowledge that there is a standard. The only reason why a lot of companies are disputing some standards is because not all standards favor every business. There are some winners and losers, and I think there's a great chance for early movers to be on the winning side of the transition, because I think we're going to see one of the greatest industrial transitions since post-World War II, rewiring the way the economy works. And so the magic wand would be giving everything you buy, all the products, a carbon passport of some sort, and seeing that their journey gets stamped along the way, and knowing that when each buyer is adding to that chain, they can make a more informed decision. And so I think that's what we need to scale. Carbon platforms need to be able to economically distribute that information, and it's quite costly at the moment to do that. But with the ability of us to process a lot of transactions on our side and other companies being able to do it in-house as well and building that function, we can start to democratize the carbon information so that people can get back to work and just focus on the transition. And the best thing we want is to not have to have people being experts in carbon accounting and running a carbon accounting business themselves. We want them to be able to run their own business, and we can just help them with that underlying function of tracking.
My next question builds on your experience so far. Has there been any surprising solutions or unexpected solutions for industrial decarbonization? And this could be hard technology or soft technology or some form of information and awareness. It could be anything that has surprised you in all your years of working in this space and supporting industry.
Great to reflect on this, and thanks for asking. If I look back on my career, 12 years at Rio Tinto, a few years at Amazon, and working with heavy industries on one side of the table, working on the other side of the table as at a startup as a founder for the last 5 years, the biggest surprise, the biggest heartwarming surprise is actually the power of the executives that are the hidden heroes in their boardroom or in the C-suite, who as an individual want to go home and tell their family what they did at work today, which was decarbonize. Even though they might be in a fossil fuel driven business, there are these people that are just really wanting to drive an agenda of a lower carbon future, and they're not thinking of a 5-year horizon, which their STIP or executive bonus is linked to. They're thinking of basically 10 years or a generation, their kids' time horizon. And those people are incredibly powerful. We're very fortunate to call some of them our customers, and we've been able to connect with them on a personal level because they've said, I need to solve this for my generation. And I think if we found more of these hidden heroes, these hidden figures, and could give them the tools that they need, then they can actually drive change throughout their organizations. And if they're driving change in these large-scale enterprises where it's often very hard for government to knock on the door and tell them what to do, if you can get this change happening from the inside with these hidden heroes, we can really move mountains. And I think we're at that stage now where this is incredibly urgent. Basically, every quarter that passes, we should have gotten rid of another couple of 100 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere, or stopped it from going into the atmosphere, and we're not there yet. And so everyone in their private senior roles, getting a chief sustainability officer in place, getting that high performer, not the compliance tick box person, but the actual person who's got the ear of the CEO. And sometimes even the CEO themselves are just on a personal mission to decarbonize their sector, and they will send that message to the whole organization and the market, and that's really powerful.
That's amazing. I'd like to give a round of applause for the hidden figures, but our sound wouldn't allow for that. Yeah. So I'm happy to hear that there are hidden figures in industrial decarbonisation, or hidden heroes who are making a case for industrial decarbonisation, making sure we're moving beyond just ambition to action, moving from purpose to action. Now imagine that there are hidden heroes in different sectors, right? So maybe on a technology developer level, what would you say to encourage? Because the hidden heroes are very few. If we had a lot of hidden heroes, for the sake of simplicity, we would not be talking about industrial decarbonisation, isn't it? If 50% of the workforce was made up of hidden heroes. So what would you say to encourage hidden heroes in technology development? So think of nuclear, think of carbon capture and storage, think of renewables, think of energy storage. You know, there's so many technology developers in that space who have invested so much money, and some of them are driven by the need to meet that ambition to decarbonize industry. So what would you say to the few hidden heroes there? And how to encourage others to be heroes as well?
The traits of the hidden heroes in decarbonisation we've seen is incredible strength and leadership. So they have a strong opinion and they can withstand a lot. At Amazon, we used to have a value which was called disagree and commit, and sometimes your leader would understand your position, but you'd all have to just disagree and work together. And I found that these leaders, what I would encourage is picking something ambitious that can make a large, not just an incremental change, but a significant change, and then having the ability to bring people with you on a 5-year plus horizon, because we're noticing that the talent out there. So if you're wanting to work for one of these hidden heroes, they're incredibly inspiring when they step into the spotlight and they decide to lead the charge on a certain initiative. There are incredibly talented people out there. Like probably the top talent you can go for now are people that are driven by this transition. They're people that want to have a good job and also want to participate in the most impactful work for humanity. And these leaders, I think my advice to them would be, you'd be surprised how many people get behind you when you just put out that vision. And so I think the vision is powerful, being quite resilient, because speaking as a founder myself, I think some days your job is to kind of take a lot of the issues that people don't want to work on. You do feel like you're walking on broken glass day to day, and that's kind of the job. And so just making sure that you're able to have the stamina to keep going, because day to day, it's not such a luxurious job. It's quite a privilege to be under the spotlight and have a conversation about it now and reflect. But in an hour's time, I'll be back just grinding through spreadsheets and business cases. And so knowing that people can just roll up their sleeves and do some of that hidden work that the hidden heroes can succeed from is really powerful. And I think in a deep tech space, you need to be prepared to be misunderstood for a while so that you can show evidence and milestones and eventually be proven right.
That's amazing. What building on your experience and your expertise, what advice would you give to the academic community? Because a number of research groups doing research to support industrial decarbonization, from the technology side to the policy, to the markets, the finance, the economics. So what advice would you give to this community?
I think the gap for me, I mean, there's some incredible research streams going and there's some really long-term bets, but the gap I see is the ability for governments to actually get the smarter policy we were talking about. If you give a policy problem to a group of academics and tell them it has to be implemented in the next cycle of government, they'll come up with some very actionable ways to break things down in 6 months, 1 year, 24 months horizons. And I think that's what government needs. I mean, if a party is just the basket of policies that it's recommending to the public and bringing those to a vote, then I think academia could help with helping them craft smarter policies. And then I guess also bringing commercialization in-house, just like the internet was born from labs of universities, I think some lower carbon technologies can be proven out a little bit further in-house. And so I'd actually encourage more funding into universities to go from that zero stage to pre-commercialization. I know it happens in a few cases, but that's a gap we see. And I speak a lot on the other side of the table to the recipients of the technology. So imagine a 50-year-old steel production company, and they'll see this kind of emerging, unproven technology, but they just can't make the leap yet. But if they see something that's running in a small facility, then they can just embrace that, and open blueprint designs that they can adopt are very powerful.
That's amazing. So more funding to support that technology innovation from a 0 to a 9 within, an academic environment. I'm sure the funders are listening to that advice. What excites you most about the future of industrial decarbonisation?
The workforce point you mentioned early on, that was where it was landing for me, was just the exciting prospect of creating a new jobs landscape where you can have a very low barrier to entry to people who are working on the next set of solar farms, solar arrays, industrialized batteries, and eventually making their day-to-day living expenses lower. I think that's incredibly exciting. What was the factory revolution of the post-war era can be the energy revolution. And I think countries being a bit more power independent as opposed to relying on international pipelines for energy. And then also the ability for the individual consumer to make a difference more in future. I think you see some circularity in fashion, for example, and secondhand goods, recycling things. I think the consumer will be the hidden hero over the next decade as they start to just demand a lot more transparency in how things are made. What are the ecological impacts of how something is made? And then using their weapon as their wallet as a weapon to now drive change up the value stream. We've seen that these big players will be incredibly responsive to end consumer demand. It's just that they can't organize themselves around a collective voice. So seeing a lot more of that unified approach to the way we buy and consume things, I think, could be very exciting. And we'll have the most exciting 10 years of the energy transition are in front of us, because this is the inflection point. This is make or break. We're scientifically going past 1.5 degrees already. And as every week passes, it's another 10 or 20 million tons of CO2 that we should have stopped emitting. So this is the time for a consumer to have their voice, and also for the hidden heroes in these big companies to decide that 2025 big project is going to be an ambitious decarbonisation project.
Amazing. So building on that answer, and given that we do have limited resources around the world, even on a national level, on a firm level, if you were in the position as a resource lead, and you are a hidden hero within the resource distribution environments of finance, what will you prioritize? Will you invest in retrofitting existing industry, energy intensive, whether it's metal, cement, iron and steel, or building new industry that from the get-go they have like negative carbon footprints, while we wait for the existing sectors to come to their end of life? What would you?
The marginal abatement curves are really powerful here. So what is the carbon reduction for insulating boilers in electricity production? Or what is the benefit of co-locating energy storage with facilities? I think I would start to just short-term look at those marginal abatement curves per sector and go in heavily there. And in terms of looking at the world of finance, I think loans are really powerful. We have some customers that get interest rate discounts on their loans of 5 to 10 basis points across billions of dollars, and it adds up. And the amount of action we've seen taken for just a 10 basis point incentive is more effective than a lot of carbon taxes that are being rolled out. And when you see how expensive carbon taxes can be for some participants in the economy, and at the same time you could get the same effect just with smart financial lending, then I think there would be a great lever to pull there, which is banks making conditional loans to a lot of these other players in the sectors. And with that capital, I think that is the best resource that we can provide. And going after carbon directly, I know there is an ESG, and we often, at CarbonChain, we often think of the E standing for emissions instead of environment, but still prioritizing those, knowing how urgent climate change is, we have to think of where is the best ecological value, and I would still say it's carbon for the next 10 years or so.
I really like your answer, because your answer is, with smart financing, we can do both, right? We can do anything we set our minds to do. I mean, we spoke about smart policy, smart finance now, smart people in terms of giving people the information to buy low carbon products. We've spoken about collaborations, so smart collaborations, and under smart people, hidden heroes as levers to really move the needle on industrial decarbonisation. And I don't know if you have any other thing to add, that you like to talk about in the space of industrial decarbonisation?
I think we underestimate the power of collaboration and getting a lot of different participants together that wouldn't normally collaborate. So I think the triple threat is academia, private company, and startup, underpinned by governance. And that triple threat is something that we should look at invoking more. You get the hustle from the startup, you get the intelligence and like the expertise and deep pockets from private sector, and you also get the expertise and even deeper knowledge from academia to enrich that. And so I think that's something that we could see leveraged a lot more in future. And knowing that it's time now just for everybody to try to think about what is their campaign for a lower carbon lifestyle, and knowing that what you do at work, you can also do at home. So having conversations, not just in the boardroom table, but at the dinner table with your family. Some of our customers have their toughest stakeholders at home at the dinner table, and their children are saying, why aren't you decarbonising? And we thank those stakeholders, that younger generation. And so I would say the champion of just children wanting to see a better future as well is something to listen to.
Oh, that's amazing. And there's this concept of, doing the right thing and doing things right? So I think so far, in my opinion, when it comes to industrial decarbonisation, we've been trying to do the right thing. What does doing things right, what would doing things right look like? Because doing the right thing has just gotten us to a position where we have so many solutions, so many options. And now we're thinking, what do you do first? How do you continue? But what will doing things right look like in the space of industrial decarbonisation?
Yeah, doing things right. I think it's just more a larger coordinated effort. I think you can only have so many martyrs who have stopped flying, who are vegetarian and are unfortunately working in a silo. But I think if you can create a large movement of people working in the right way, I think that would be really effective. So I think just taking a measured approach to what's being done. Accountability is really hard when things aren't being measured. And I think just having people know what their impact is. I remember seeing some statistics about the top earners in the population are responsible or linked to the most emissions. And so the right discussion to have there is there's just a small number of people that are responsible for a lot of emissions. So let's have the right conversations about how can they change and how can they drive change, and being okay to have a data-driven conversation. So I think it's doing the right things, but at scale, and then I think we'll get the right outcomes we want.
Amazing. So I think it's a good place for us to finish. It's been wonderful talking to you. We started talking about industrial decarbonisation, and we soon discovered that you can't separate it from people, whether they are hidden heroes or consumers, because sometimes people see industry as so far away from them. They don't think they're connected to industry. And I say everything around us is an industrial product. My shirt, my trouser, the pen, the paper, your bicycle, your vegan food option. So we are really linked to industry. Thank you so much for your time. I like the concept of hidden heroes. I know there's a movie called Hidden Figures. Probably need to do something on hidden heroes for industrial decarbonization, hidden heroes in academia, industry, policy, finance, and in the startup world as well, because you are a hidden hero, and thanks for spending time with me today. So, as my number one hidden hero, if people want to find more about you and CarbonChain, where do we send them to?
We're hiring at the moment, so a great place to come to is CarbonChain's job page, carbonchain.com, and onto the About section where we list some of the jobs we've got open. We're looking for some great full stack engineers at the moment and people who want to become these hidden heroes that can partner with heavy industry to decarbonize from the inside of those organizations and scale out. And also look out for some of our blogs we do on different industries decarbonizing. We have some case studies of early mover industries, and it's really inspiring seeing some of these companies go first and reap the benefits of early mover advantage. And I think that more can be done. Don't see this as a vitamin versus a painkiller. I think there's an opportunity here, a commercial opportunity for companies that move first, and CarbonChain can help them do that.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Energy Futures podcast. Here at Energy Futures Lab, we are dedicated to addressing global energy challenges through pioneering research, innovation, and advocacy. To learn more about us and the exciting projects we are working on, visit our website and follow us on social media. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest content.